The crisp scent of pine and promise filled the early morning air as Lila Marin pulled into the sleepy mountain town of Graywood, her tiny car rattling from the 5-hour journey. Leaves, copper, and gold danced across the winding road like a welcome parade. A quaint wooden sign at the entrance read, "Welcome to Graywood, where stories find their endings." She had no idea how badly she needed one dot after 6 years of teaching literature in the city. She had accepted a temporary post at Graywood High in Escape, disguised as employment. Her soul was tired, her voice quiet, and she carried a grief no one had dared to ask about. Her cottage, more charming than she expected, sat nestled between tall firs, with a red mailbox and a swing that creaked in the breeze. It was the kind of place people found peace in. She wasn't sure she believed in that anymore. The town moved like poetry, slow, thoughtful, intentional. On her first morning, she stepped into the corner cafe, a soft bell chiming above the door. Inside, the scent of cinnamon rolls and maple coffee mingled with warmth and laughter. A new face. A woman with wild gray curls and kind eyes smiled from behind the counter. "You're the new teacher?" Lila nodded. "Just arrived last." "Night. Well, welcome." "I'm Marcy, and this is Beans and Books. We serve scones with side plots and coffee with closure." Lila laughed softly. "Sounds perfect." Marcy poured a mug, her eyes twinkling. "He's here every morning, reading in the back." "You'll spot him." Lila blinked. "Who?" But Marcy only nodded toward the farthest table. He sat by the window, a book in his hand and a stillness around him that didn't ask for company. His presence was quiet, not withdrawn, like a man content to watch the world pass rather than interrupt it. Dark, tousled hair curled slightly at the collar of his worn jacket. He looked about 35, maybe less, with hands that had stories in their lines. Lila's gaze met his for just a second, and in that single glance something stirred. Not attraction, recognition, as if the silence in her bones had nodded. To the stillness in his dot, she looked away quickly and chose a table near the fireplace. Marcy leaned in with a knowing smile. "That's Elias Carr, builds furniture, doesn't say much." "Noted," Lila whispered, taking a sip. Still, she found herself stealing a glance again. He wasn't looking. Later that week, they met again, properly this time on a rainy Thursday. Lila was juggling her umbrella, school files, and a bag of groceries when the handle snapped and everything fell onto the sidewalk in a dramatic pile of apples. "Salabi and STORMWATR. She sighed, mewing, trying to rescue wet lesson plans when a pair of boots stopped beside her. A hand offered an umbrella. The other began gathering soggy papers without a word. She looked up. It was him. "Thank you," she said, blinking water from her lashes. He nodded, still silent, then held out her binder. Their hands brushed. A jolt not romantic, but soul-deep traveled. Through her. "I'm Lila. I just moved here." "I know," he said, voice low, steady. "I don't think I've caught your name." He paused, just long enough for it to matter. "Elias." Just Elias. The following days were peppered with soft moments, passing by each other at the market, a brief nod at the bookstore, a shared smile in the cafe. They didn't speak again yet, but every time she saw him, it felt like her soul leaned forward slightly, listening, and though they were strangers, her heart whispered, "He spoke to my soul." Before my name, Lila quickly learned that Graywood moved at the pace of a story told by an old friend, slow, warm, and full of pauses where the silence meant more than the words. Her days at the high school started early, her classroom smelling of chalk, worn books, and teenage dreams. Her students, though quiet at first, soon warmed to her soft voice and thoughtful questions. She read them poetry, not because it was in the curriculum, but because she believed hearts learn best when spoken to gently. Still, the ache followed her like a shadow. She hadn't spoken about Mason, her younger brother, since the night the phone call came. A car crash. A single moment that stole years. Teaching had kept her going. Grading papers had become a lifeline, but Greywood's silence left her with space. She hadn't dared enter before, and it was in that silence that Elias kept showing up. Elias Carr built furniture, but mostly he rebuilt himself at the edge of town. Just before the hills began to rise, Elias owned a small, hand-built workshop that smelled like cedar and solitude. He built it after the divorce, after the noise, after too much world had collapsed at once. He carved tables and shelves, reading benches and cradle rockers, each piece carefully touched with a signature, a tiny oak leaf, engraved discreetly near a leg or hinge dot. He spoke little, laughed even less. But people trusted him. The townsfolk said Elias had a heart that bent like willow quiet, but rooted deep. They also said he once played piano. Now, he didn't own one. He lived simply, a small cabin, a dog named Finch, and evenings spent sketching. Designs on parchment paper, a mug of tea cooling beside him. He noticed Lila on her first day. He noticed how she carried her grief not in her face, but in the way she folded her hands when no one was watching. He noticed how she walked slowly past the river trail, as if afraid of what the water might remember, and maybe, just maybe, he saw in her the same quiet he'd lived in for years. By mid-October, the town was awash in fire-colored leaves and fog-kissed mornings. Lila began keeping a journal again, something she hadn't done in years. She wrote about her students, about the way maple trees curved over the library courtyard, about the way people in Greywood said good morning like they meant it. And she wrote about Elias. She didn't know why. She barely knew him. He never spoke more than a few words. And yet there was something comforting in his steadiness, like standing beside a river that never rushed, that never stopped. One Thursday, Marcy handed her a parcel wrapped in brown paper. No, she said, sliding it across the cafe counter. But I think you'll know. Inside was a carved wooden bookmark, lightweight, sanded smooth. An oak leaf at the top, and beneath it, her name etched in tiny cursive, Lila. She stared at it, breath caught somewhere between her ribs. He knew her name. The mayor greeted her by name after only 2 weeks. Pearl, who ran the flower shop, began leaving tiny sprigs of lavender in her school mailbox. Kids waved to her from the bakery window. And every Friday, she passed Elias's workshop on her way home from school. Sometimes he was out front, sanding a rocking chair, Finch snoozing nearby. He never waved. But he always looked up. Their eyes would meet, and in that glance, something tender passed between them, something unspoken and sacred. Before Greywood, Elias had lived in a city of skyscrapers and speed. He'd been married once, briefly, to a woman who needed more noise than he could offer. They had tried to fit into each other's lives like mismatched puzzle pieces. She needed ambition. He needed stillness. And love, it turned out, wasn't always enough when the rhythm was wrong. So he left the piano, the skyline, the noise, and found Greywood, where no one asked him to speak more than he wanted to, except Lila. She hadn't asked, but she listened. Even in silence, she listened, and it undid something in him. One late afternoon, just as the first frost kissed the grass, Lila found herself by the river trail after school. She sat on a bench, one carved with an oak leaf at its base, and opened her journal. I'm afraid of feeling again, she wrote. Because grief took so much, what if joy takes more? A twig snapped nearby. She looked up. Elias stood a few feet away, a book in his hand. Finch wagged his tail gently. I didn't mean to interrupt, he said, voice low. You're not? He hesitated, then quietly, that bench, I made it. She smiled, eyes soft. I thought so. They sat in silence for a few moments, the sound of water lapping gently against stones. I used to come here with my brother. she said at last. Before. Elias didn't ask what before meant, but he nodded. And for the first time she felt seen without being asked to bleed. Some people fall loudly. We fell like rain, soft, steady, and without realizing. It began with small things, a shared trail, a missed ride, a conversation that started with a book and ended with the MOONRICE. It was a Saturday afternoon, the kind of crisp autumn day that made every leaf seem hand-painted. Lila was on her way back from the local library when she saw Elias in front of his workshop, struggling with a delivery crate half his size. She hesitated. He wasn't the kind of man you offered help to. He seemed carved from the kind of independence that didn't ask or expect. But something in her said ask anyway. You need a hand? She called, voice light. He looked up, a strand of hair falling across his brow. I won't say no, he replied. They got the crate inside. It was heavier than expected, and by the time they slid it against the back wall, they were both breathless, laughing softly. Coffee? He asked, surprising them both. She blinked. You make coffee? He nodded once. Strong. No promises beyond that. His kitchen was all wood and light and soft music playing from an old radio. A dog bowl by the door, a hand-carved spice rack, an open journal on the table. He poured 2 mismatched mugs and gestured for her to sit. For a few minutes, neither of them said anything. Then he asked, what brought you to Graywood? She hesitated, then said honestly, grief, and the hope that maybe small things would hurt less here. He nodded, not flinching from her honesty. I came here after losing something too, he said. Not someone, just ... Parts of myself I didn't recognize anymore. It was the longest sentence he'd said to her yet. Her eyes softened. Did you find them again? He thought for a moment. No, but I found quiet, and that felt like a beginning. After that, they began to see each other more often. She found reasons to stop by the workshop, an old bookshelf she needed help repairing, a garden bench she wanted for spring. He never rushed the work. Instead, he'd explain the wood grain, ask about her students, offer her tea with honey and one word of comfort disguised as conversation. One afternoon, she leaned against the work table, watching him smooth out cedar planks. You don't talk much, she said gently. I talk enough, he replied. She smiled. That's fair. Then, after a pause, he looked up and said something that reached her ribcage. But I hear more than most. Their chemistry didn't spark like fire. It simmered low, steady, magnetic. He noticed when her hair was different. She remembered how he liked his tea 3 sugars, no milk, when she gave a student one of his carved bookmarks as a gift. He noticed when he left one on her desk the next morning, this time. Shaped like a river with her initials in the curve, she felt her chest ache in the best possible way. They didn't call it flirting. They just kept showing up one evening. The clouds rolled in faster than expected. Lila had gone for a walk, hoping to clear her mind from a difficult parent-teacher conference, but the skies opened with thunderous grief. She ducked under a tree, clutching her coat. Just as she pulled her phone from her pocket, headlights swept. The road thought it was Elias, no words. Just a window rolled down and a nod. She climbed in, soaked and shivering. He handed her a blanket from the back seat without saying a thing. The heater roared to life. When they reached her cottage, she didn't get out immediately. Want to come in? She asked quietly. He looked at her. Not just at her face, but at her like he was reading every word she hadn't yet said. And he said, only if you want me to. She did. Her fireplace crackled gently. She handed him a mug of cinnamon tea and curled her feet beneath her on the couch. He sat across from her, quiet as always, but present. She looked into the flames. Do you believe some people are meant to understand you before they know you? He took a long breath. I believe some people's silences speak the same language. She turned her gaze to him. Do ours? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a slip of folded paper. I don't write much, he said, but sometimes I carve words before I carve wood. She unfolded it slowly, inside in neat, steady handwriting. Were the words, "You don't have to speak for your pain to be seen. Some people carry echoes too." Her hands trembled. I see you, Lila, he said quietly, even in the quiet. And in that moment, something fell open inside her softly, but completely. That night, after he left, she sat beside the fireplace for hours, her tea gone cold, her heart warm. She wrote in her journal, "He doesn't just listen to what I say. He hears the parts I haven't found the courage to speak yet." The first time I felt safe was in the space between his words. The weeks passed like petals drifting on a river, soft, unhurried, and certain. Lila and Elias began spending time together the way music builds, one gentle note at a time. On a quiet Friday evening, Lila baked too much pumpkin bread. As the scent filled her cottage, she wrapped a still warm loaf in a tea towel, walked the winding trail to Elias's cabin, and left it on his doorstep with a note, "For the man who builds benches and says things worth rereading." Morning, she found a carved wooden acorn by her mailbox. The word "thank you" etched on its bottom dot that became their language gifts instead of sentences. Each carving was a poem. Each letter a gesture. Greywood's first snow felt like a secret, soft and sudden. Elias found her at the bookstore the next morning, gloves in hand, and said only, "Walk?" She nodded. They wandered the quiet, powdered forest path, boots crunching beneath them. The silence was warm between them now, no longer uncertain. At one point, she stopped and stared up at the snow falling through the pine trees. "I haven't felt this quiet inside in years." He looked at her. "That's how I feel when you're around." She blinked, stunned by the simplicity of his honesty. He reached for her hand slowly, gently, as if asking permission with every motion, and she let him. One evening, as a storm whispered outside, Lila brought her worn copy of The Little Prince to Elias's workshop. They sat on the floor beside the wood stove, reading aloud in turns, voices low, fire crackling beside them. When she reached the line, "It is only with the heart that one can see rightly." Her voice trembled. Elias touched her knee gently. "That line saved me once. Tell me." He hesitated. "Then my dad was a carpenter. He used to quote that line when I got angry or scared. After he died, I stopped building for a while. Thought I had to become someone tougher, someone louder." "You didn't," she said. "I know that now," he murmured. "Because you're not loud either, and you're still the strongest person I know." He didn't call it a date, but it was. He packed a thermos of hot apple cider and surprised her after school one Friday with a note on her windshield, "Meet me by the river." Where the bench knows our names. She found him waiting with a thick wool blanket and a tiny lantern that flickered gently in the dusk. They sat close, sipping cider, watching fog drift lazily across the river. "Why me?" she asked softly. Elias didn't look away. "Because your quiet makes space for mine. And because you never asked me to be anything else." Her breath hitched. "You make me feel the same." And in the fading light, their heads leaned together, and their souls simply rested. One night, she invited him over for soup and stayed up long after the bowls were empty. They sat on her living room rug, knees touching. "I haven't told anyone this," she whispered, hands wrapped around a mug. "But when my brother died, I stopped writing. I stopped believing anything I said mattered." Elias's jaw tightened, but not in fear-only reverence. "He loved words," she continued. "We used to write each other letters, even when we lived in the same house. After the funeral, I couldn't even touch a pen." Elias reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a tiny carved feather. For your voice, he said, placing it in her palm. Whenever you feel ready. Tears slipped down her cheek. I'm falling for you, she admitted, her voice barely above breath. He cupped her cheek with a hand that was gentle, steady and trembling just slightly. I already fell. They never made big declarations. Instead, he fixed the squeaky hinge on her cottage door without telling her. She left poems tucked into his glove box. He built her a writing desk with a drawer lined in soft velvet. For memories she wasn't ready to unpack. She brought him his favorite tea blend from a shop 3 towns over. Their love was written in gestures, stitched into the hours they shared. And one snowy morning, he whispered the words in her ear as they walked down the hill. I love you, Lila. She stopped walking, turned to him, and said it back, not as an echo, but as a vow. And I love you, Elias, quietly, fully, entirely. Sometimes love doesn't leave. Sometimes we push it away first. The first snow had melted. Winter leaned in quietly, graying the skies and shortening the days. For a while, everything between Lila and Elias had felt like it was blooming even in the cold. Their love wasn't dramatic. It was steady, warm, and alive, but peace doesn't always mean the past is healed. Dot had arrived without a return address. A crisp envelope tucked among utility bills and holiday flyers. Dot inside was a photo of Mason Dot and a letter from his old friend, someone who had been with him the night he died, someone who blamed himself and wanted to talk. Lila froze in her kitchen, her breath shallow. Her hands trembled as the past carefully buried rose like a tidal wave. She hadn't prepared to feel this. Not now. Not while she was finally... Okay, that night, Elias stopped by with 2 mugs of cider and a book he wanted to read to her. But when he walked in, she was distant, pale. What is it? He asked, gently placing the mugs down. She handed him the letter. Silent. Dot he read it, slowly, carefully, then looked up, waiting. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered. I'm just starting to feel like I can breathe again. If I go back there, if I talk about that night, I might lose everything I've rebuilt. Elias stepped closer. Lila, maybe going back isn't losing anything. Maybe it's setting something down. But what if I can't handle it? He paused, then said, You don't have to be fixed to be loved. She looked at him then, eyes wet. But what if you love a version of me that stops existing if I let this break open? That silence, that deep, echoing silence, was filled with his own fear, not of her breaking, but of what he couldn't fix. Next few days, something shifted. Not loudly, but enough that she felt it. Elias became distant, not cold, but hesitant. He still texted, still carved tiny wooden gifts, still showed up, but his eyes no longer lingered. His touch wasn't as present, and his smile, always soft, always rare, seemed further away. At first, she thought it was her. Then she realized he was scared too. One morning, Lila sat at beans and books with her untouched cup of tea. Marcy, wiping down the counter, glanced at her. He's pulling away, isn't he? Lila nodded. I don't understand. We were fine. Elias has loved before, and he lost. Lila blinked. He told me about the divorce. Marcy sat down beside her, voice low. Before that, his mother. Cancer took her when he was a teenager, and he blames himself for not seeing how scared she was. That stung deep. He sees your pain, Lila, and it's waking up something old in him, something he never forgave himself for. Lila swallowed hard. So he's afraid of watching someone he loves suffer again? Marcy nodded. You don't have to fix that. But you do have to decide, do you let him go? Or show him that love isn't rescue, it's presence? 2 nights later, Lila showed up at his workshop. She found him sanding a table, his hands rough, his eyes unreadable. I need to talk to you, she said, stepping in. He looked at her. Quiet. I'm not a problem to fix, Elias. I never needed you to carry my grief. Just to sit beside me while I carry it. I never asked to carry it, he said, voice low but tight. But I don't know how to watch you walk into pain and not try to save you. I'm not asking to be saved. He set the sander down, exhaling sharply. I know. But I failed. Once, I let someone hurt alone, and I lost them. Lila softened. You didn't lose me. His eyes met hers then, filled with so much aching honesty it cracked something in her. But I'm scared that if I stay, I'll watch you fall apart. She walked to him, stood inches away, then stand beside me. Let me fall if I have to, but don't leave before I do. And for the first time, Elias didn't respond. He just looked down Dot and said nothing. Lila left that night with her heart heavy and uncertain. For 3 days, they didn't speak. She went to school, smiled through classes, and cried alone in her cottage at night. She reread the letter. She almost replied. Elias buried himself in work, carving a bench for the winter festival. He didn't sleep. He didn't eat much. He kept his distance from everything except the ache in his chest. Both were aching in silence. Both were afraid. Of reaching for the other first. She watched the road outside the school window, hoping he might pass by. He walked by her cottage every morning, staring at the lit window, wondering if she'd come out. Love hadn't disappeared, but the question lingered between them. Was it strong enough to stay when fear told them to run? The hardest part of loving you was believing I deserved to. The town was preparing for the annual Winter Lights Festival. Fairy lights lined the rooftops. The scent of cinnamon, pine, and hope filled the air. Music floated from windows, and children practiced songs in the school gym. But Lila felt the absence of Elias in everything. He hadn't come by the cafe, hadn't responded to her messages. She missed his silence more than she thought possible. That night, Lila lit a candle on her desk, the one Elias made her, and finally opened her journal. She wrote a letter, not to him, but for herself. Thought grief stole my voice, but it didn't. I gave it away, piece by piece. To silence I thought kept me safe, but he heard me anyway. And now that I've learned to speak again, I want to say the thing I never could. I love him, not because he fills the silence, but because he holds it with me. She folded the paper, placed it in an envelope, and walked through the frostbitten night. She found him on the river path, of course she did, sitting alone on the bench. They'd claimed without trying, his gloved hands resting on his lap, his eyes full of distance. She stood in front of him, holding out the letter. I don't want you to read it now, she said quietly. I just want you to hear me. Elias looked up, a breath catching in his throat. I was afraid you'd see my pain and think I was unfinished, she whispered. But love isn't about waiting until we're healed. It's about holding each other through the healing. He didn't move. I'm not asking you to rescue me, she said. Just to walk beside me, even when it's heavy. Silence. Then I read every word you never said, he murmured, voice thick. And still I ran. Tears slid down his cheek, silent, just like him. I've loved you since the first time you sat on this bench and said nothing, because it felt like home. You felt like home. Lila sat beside him. I was never afraid of your silence, she whispered, only of losing it. He turned to her, eyes wet and searching. I don't know how to be the man who always says the right thing, he said, but I will never walk away from you again. You don't have to say the right thing, she said. You just have to stay. Then he did the one thing he'd never done before. He took her face in both hands, leaned in slowly, asking with his breath, not his words, and kissed her softly. It wasn't a kiss of fire. It was a kiss of shelter, of staying. They sat by her fireplace again, his hand wrapped around hers, their mugs untouched. You were never too much, he said suddenly. That's the lie you carry. She looked at him, her throat tight. And you were never not enough, she whispered. That's the one you carry. They said nothing else for a long time, but neither of them let go. Love didn't arrive like thunder. It arrived like sunrise. The Winter Lights Festival came to Greywood like a page from a storybook, lanterns hanging from snow-laced trees, soft music floating down cobblestone streets, and joy tucked into every corner of the town. This year, Elias didn't attend alone, and Lila walked hand in hand past the booths, wrapped in scarves and the comfort of each other's presence. He wore the knitted hat she made him. She wore the wooden acorn pin he carved. When they passed the bench by the river, their bench, he squeezed her hand gently. No words needed. Lila mailed the letter to Mason's friend. She didn't need answers anymore. Just closure. I've forgiven you, she wrote, because Mason wouldn't have wanted anyone to carry that weight. She signed it with love, folded the page, and sealed it with peace. After she dropped it into the post box, she turned around and found Elias waiting with 2 cups of cider. You okay? He asked softly. She nodded. For the first time, yes. On New Year's morning, Elias surprised her with something he'd been working on secretly, a brand new writing desk, made of light pine and love. When she opened the top drawer, she found a lined journal with a note inside. For the stories you haven't told yet. I'd be here to listen to everyone. She cried. He held her. Later that afternoon, she wrote her first poem in years, him carrying groceries while she read him lines of her. Newest story. Her bringing him hot tea while he worked late in his shop. Them reading by the fire, sometimes in silence, sometimes aloud, quiet laughter in the kitchen, music softly playing while snow fell. Love that didn't ask to be perfect, only honest. By March, the river thawed. Wildflowers bloomed. And on a gentle Sunday morning, as birds sang and sunlight spilled over the hills, Elias knelt by the garden bench he carved for her months ago. He held out a small wooden ring box. Inside was a simple ring of tiny silver, band with an oak leaf engraved on the inside. He didn't give a speech. He didn't need to. He just looked at her and said, "Will you write the rest of your life with me?" She didn't answer with words. She just threw her arms around him and whispered, "Always." Greywood didn't change much. The seasons still whispered softly through the trees. The cafe still smelled like cinnamon and hope. The river still shimmered beneath the sunset. And on a quiet hill near the old path, 2 children laughed as they chased a dog named Finch Jr. through the tall grass. A woman sat on a bench, sketching a new story in her notebook. A man stood nearby, sanding a cradle made from cedar and dreams, and their love, quiet, steady, and endlessly true, remained the soft, golden thread through every chapter that followed.